Hello, and welcome to the Bradford Literature Festival, the digital program. Thanks especially to the New Dutch Writing and the Dutch Foundation for Literature. My name is Lenny Goodings, and I'm chair of Virago Press, and I'm delighted to be hosting this talk about the iconic poet Sylvia Plath, which the Bradford Literature Festival have entitled A New Plath Through the Darkness, Redefining Sylvia Plath. And what's really fascinating is that the extraordinary poet who took her own life nearly 60 years ago in 1963 is still providing us with such gripping discussions, arguments, and books. And we have two new ones, which are very different today, that we're going to talk about today. One is a novel by Connie Palmen, who was published in her native country in Nederland in 2015 and now translated into English. Connie Palmen has written 4 previous novels. He's called this one Your Story, My Story, and it's an audacious and compelling novel told in the voice of Ted Hughes, the Yorkshire poet with whom Sylvia spent 7 tumultuous years in marriage. The other book is the impressive and also compelling Red Comet, a biography by Heather Clark that's subtitled The Short Life and Blazing Art of Sylvia Plath, an American academic who's written 2 earlier books, one on Plath and one on Hughes's poetry. Sorry, one on Plath and Hughes's poetry. She divides her time between New York State and Yorkshire as she is professor of contemporary poetry at the University of Huddersfield. I am Canadian, living and talking to you from London. Connie is in Amsterdam. Heather is outside New York City, and we're delighted to be part of the Bradford Festival. Welcome, Connie. Welcome, Heather.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So to start, I want to ask each of you, why? Why did you feel there could be possibly more to say about Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes? What motivated you? Is this would you say, a sort of rescue job? I mean, Heather, you say you want to recast her as a craftswoman and to examine her commitment not to death, but to art. Could you talk to that and tell us fully what you meant by that? And then also I'd like you to read a bit from your prologue. Thanks.
Sure. If I had to pick one sentence that carried me through the writing of this book, and in fact, I think gave me the courage to tackle it in the first place, it's a sentence by Hermione Lee, who is the great biographer of women's lives. And she wrote an amazing biography of Virginia Woolf, which I consider the gold standard. And so she has a sentence she writes in her short introduction to biography. She writes that women whose lives have involved suicide, mental illness, self-harm, abuse are often treated as victims or psychological case histories first and professional writers second. And I think my whole goal in writing this book was to try to treat Plath as a professional writer first, right? And to kind of flip that script, because I did feel that her life had been pathologized and that her death had been sensationalized in previous biographies and books and movies and things like that in popular culture. And I felt that she'd almost become better known for the manner of her death than for her brilliant and trailblazing poems. And that just seemed a terrible travesty to me. So I guess I wanted to, sort of rewrite that script if I could and really focus on her literary journey. And the other kind of sentence that I had in my mind as I was writing was, how did Sylvia Plath become the writer that she became? And that might sound like a very simple question, but given that I had to wade through thousands and thousands of documents, and at times I would feel really overwhelmed by just how much was out there and how much I needed to read. And that one question would kind of keep me on the straight and narrow, and it helped me clarify the mission of the book, such as it was. So, and actually what I'm going to read from the prologue is, I go into that question a bit more about, why I attempted why I attempted this biography, which I think is the 11th biography of Sylvia Plath. And that, that was another challenge, kind of justifying, well, and people ask me all the time, why do we need another biography of Sylvia Plath? I mean, that was probably the question that I got the most. And maybe that's part of the reason it's 900 pages long, because, and there was a lot of new material that hadn't been available, to previous scholars. So I really wanted to take advantage of that wealth of new material as well. But let me just read a brief section from my prologue. Since her suicide in 1963, Sylvia Plath has become a paradoxical symbol of female power and helplessness, whose life has been subsumed by her afterlife. Caught in the limbo between icon and cliche, she has been mythologized and pathologized in movies, television, and biographies as a high priestess of poetry obsessed with death. These distortions gained momentum in the 1960s when Ariel was published. Most reviewers didn't know what to make of the burning, pulsating metaphors in poems like Lady Lazarus, or the chilly imagery of Edge. Time magazine called the book, quote, a jet of flame from a literary dragon who in the last months of her life breathed a burning river of bale across the literary landscape, unquote. The Washington Post dubbed Plath a, quote, snake lady of misery, unquote, in an article entitled The Cult of Plath. Robert Lowell, in his introduction to Ariel, characterized Plath as a Medea figure, hurtling toward her own destruction. Even Plath's closest reader, her husband, Ted Hughes, often portrayed her as a passive vessel through which a dangerous muse spoke. Recent scholarship has deepened our understanding of Plath as a master of performance and irony. Yet the critical work done on Plath has not sufficiently altered her popular cliched image as the Marilyn Monroe of the literati. Melodramatic portraits of Plath as a crazed poetic priestess are still with us. A recent biographer called her, quote, a sorceress who had the power to attract men with a flash of her intense eyes, a tortured soul whose only destiny was death by her own hand, unquote. He wrote that Plath, quote, aspired to transform herself into a psychotic deity, unquote. These caricatures have calcified over time into the popular reductive version of Sylvia Plath we all know, the suicidal writer of the bell jar whose cultish devotees are black-clad young women. Plath thought herself a different kind of sorceress. Quote, I am a damn good high priestess of the intellect, she wrote her friend Mel Woody in July 1954. Many of Plath's friends have grown impatient with these distorted versions of her. Plath's close friend, Phil McCurdy, does not recognize what he calls the literary psycho he encounters in biographies that fail to capture her ebullient, brainy essence. We were crazy, but it was crazy about Kafka, he said. Plath's Smith confidant, Ellie Friedman Klein, is tired of her brilliant friend being chained to what she calls the death machine, her suicide sensationalized. That Plath is now identified with the cliches she examined ironically in her work is part of her tragedy. Elizabeth Hardwick once wrote of Sylvia Plath, quote, when the curtain goes down, it is her own dead body there on the stage, sacrificed to her own plot, unquote. Yet to suggest that Plath's suicide was some sort of grand finale only perpetuates the Plath myth that simplifies our understanding of her work and her life. Previous biographies have focused on the trajectory of Plath's suicide, as if her every act from childhood on was predetermined to bring her closer to a fate she deserved for flying too close to the sun. This book will trace Plath's literary and intellectual development rather than her undoing. Thank you.
I like that idea. I like the idea of development rather than undoing. I thought that was extremely nicely put. And certainly you have done that. So Connie, yours is an entirely different enterprise, isn't it? In some ways,
yes, it is.
It's a novel. It's slim, and it's about. I liked what I especially loved about it too was the power, the way you talk about the power of literature, even outside of this story about Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. But it's also obviously about Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath. But you too have seems to me have set yourself the task of rescuing, a sort of rescue job. Can you read a little bit from maybe read first and then tell us a little bit about your idea of rescuing Ted?
Okay. In novels, we always go the other way around. First read and then talk. That's good. Well, I'm Dutch, so my English is not that fluent as your
Okay,
English.
I think it's probably better than our Dutch.
That's for sure. So I start just on the first page.
Good.
To most people, we exist only in books, my bride and I. For the past 35 years, I've had to watch with impotent horror as our real lives were buried beneath a mudslide of apocryphal stories, false witness, gossip, fabrication, and myth. Our true, complex personalities were replaced by hackneyed characters reduced to mere images, tailor-made to suit a readership with an appetite for sensationalism. And in all of this, she was the brittle saint, I the brutal traitor. I have remained silent until now. She had something in her of the religious fanatic, that reckless longing for a higher form of purity, the saintly and violent willingness to sacrifice herself, her old false self, to murder it so that she could be born again, clean, free, and above all, real. In the 7 years we were together, I never saw her with anyone, not even our children, as she really was, the way I knew her, the woman I lived with, the woman who, stamping like a filly in heat, bit my cheek and drew blood the first time we met. We didn't embrace, we attacked each other. Snorting with pleasure, with joy, I yanked the red hairband from her head, tore the silver earrings from her lobes. I would have liked to rip her dress to shreds, to strip her of all the trappings of decency, obedience, and civility, of falseness. It was cruel, it hurt, it was real. We plundered each other. Less than 4 months later, I married her. I should have known that for a woman who bites instead of kisses, loving was the same as lashing out. I should have realized that by stealing her jewelry, I was only tearing away her ornamentation and taking it as my trophy. Whoever begins this kind of love knows that violence and destruction are hidden in its heart to the death. One of us was done for from the very start. It was either her or me. In that all consuming violence called love, I'd met my match. I loved her ever since, and if her suicide was the trap she used to catch me, to swallow me, to absorb me, to become one body, she succeeded. A bridegroom taken hostage by death, linked eternally in a posthumous marriage, as inseparable as she wanted me to be from her. Her name is my name, her death is my death. Thank you.
That's very powerful. So
Thank
tell
you.
us what your sort of motive was, because it
Well,
does feel to me we're playing with the myths, some of the myths that Heather's talking about, even though I do know what you're talking about there is factually true. But what
yeah,
was your thinking?
well, I've always been very interested in the effect of storytelling on the lives of people. To give a very example that just happened was this teacher, this history teacher in a village near Paris, Samuel Paty, who was killed, captivated. Is that captivated? Killed, was killed because a little girl lied about him. So that a lie, which is a story or a gossip or whatever, can lead to the death of someone. So, and I've always been interested by this peculiar genre, which is biography, which is pretending to at least say, speak the truth or write the truth based on facts, but facts are nothing. Facts are silent if you don't marry them to other facts, if you don't interpret them, if you don't let your fantasy work with the facts. As Heathercott very well known, it's a kind of art. Biography also is a kind of art. So these two interests in how a story, how gossip, how a lie can lead to your death, can be of such a huge influence on your life, and this interest in a form of writing which is biography. Those are the basics I work with. And then I've always been interested in the fate of Ted Hughes, reading all those biographies on Sylvia Plath, especially because I'm so interested in suicide. So not drawn to Sylvia Plath by her genius or by her great writing. I only came very, very, very aware of her great writing thanks to Heather Clark, and thanks to reading her letters and reading her, not the letters to her mother, but the other letters. Um, I was really smashed by her talent, by her intellect, by her wittiness, by her. Oh, I loved it. So it's reading all this biography, interested in her pathological by her suicide. I I always felt a great sympathy or empathy with this poor Ted Hughes, who only have been 7 years she's been in his life, and the rest of his life was determined by her suicide. And that's why I also write in my book, or remind readers of this beautiful, scary sentence of Arthur Miller when he wrote in After the Fall, his piece. In fact, that was inspired on the suicide of Marilyn Monroe. A suicide kills two people, Maggie, and then this horrifying sentence, that's what it's meant for.
Mm.
So I always felt that the life of Ted Hughes, which I think was a very kind, tender person, and very woman-loving person, in a sense, not a womanizer, but I think he loved women in a natural way, with all the anger, but with all the tenderness, etc. So his fate, done by him, by all those biographies, where he is characterized as a murderer of a genius, as a villain, as a cruel person. I thought this must be awful. So that's where it comes to a novel to try to correct, to give another story to the world.
Yeah.
About.
So you're both doing a version of rescuing, as I feel.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I think you are. I mean, Heather, as you said yourself, one of the things that you were able to do in your book is talk about the making of Sylvia Plath. And I like the fact we don't meet Ted Hughes till quite a ways in, for example. I thought that was really good. We understand her childhood, her early writings, and most particularly, I was very taken with her prodigious reading of history, philosophy. So you set her up her own ambition for herself really well. But then you are especially good to pick up on Ted Hughes. You're very good on what she and Ted were to each other. And you quote Ted saying after Ted Hughes, Ted, I'm calling him Ted like I know him. You quote Ted Hughes after saying after her death, you have to be aware if you're creative, you have a demon, and that demon can destroy people who come close to you. What Connie's talking about. And I'm really fascinated. I'm like Connie, I'm fascinated by what happens with both partners have to manage that creative demon. What
Yeah, I mean, this question fascinated me as well, and I wrote my second book on Sylvia Plath and Ted Hughes and their poetic relationship. This was an academic book, so this wasn't really written for a mainstream audience. You know, it was sort of destined to languish on library shelves. um, but in that book, I was really trying to figure out how these two poets had influenced each other's work. Because I think I consider myself a Hughes scholar as well as a Plath scholar. I'm part of the Ted Hughes network at the University of Huddersfield here, you know, where I teach, where I normally teach when there's not a global pandemic. I'm in Yorkshire more often, but so I was fascinated by, you know, these two geniuses and they were married, you know, for almost 7 years, and how did they influence each other? It's just a huge question in my mind, and not just how, because I think the question of how they influenced each other really had ramifications for Anglo-American poetry.
Yeah.
In general. So this marriage was so important kind of intellectually and on a literary level. And so in my second book, I tried to parse that out and, you know, just figure out the ways in which he influenced her, she influenced him. I mean, to put it kind of simply. But I did stay away from biography, I think, a bit in that book. And then with Red Comet, I had to face it head on. And I tried to quote a lot because Plath's letters were published in 2018. And before her collected letters were published, we didn't really have a complete record, right, of her words, who she was writing to. And I wanted to take advantage of that. So I often, you know, a quote quite a bit from some of the letters and also from Hughes as well, from his journals and things like that, where things start to really break down. I guess I wanted each of them to be able to, I guess, give their side. And so you'll see that perhaps my own authorial voice retreats a bit in those moments, and I try to, I guess, let them speak for themselves as much as I can. I mean, it's very hard.
I guess what I'd like to, do you feel they wouldn't be the poets? This is my reading of yours and Connie's books and other books, that they wouldn't have been the poets they were if they hadn't met each other.
I do feel that, actually. I think that Hughes helped Plath loosen her line. And there were other people who did this too. You know, Robert Lowell and Anne Sexton, I think, were instrumental in helping her loosen that. But that was part of his mission. I think that was part of their mutual project. They wanted to shake up British poetry. And if you look at Plath's poems, you know, when she was at Smith, and they're tightly controlled. There are these sort of marvelous exercises in rhyme and meter, and she can write villanelle, she can write sestina, she can do it all. But I think what Hughes tried to get her to do was to loosen up and to not let the line control her so much, and to find this kind of inner voice. And that was, you know, part of his project. So I think he helped her in that sense. She helped him, but she exposed him to so much American poetry. You know, she gave him people to read, just as he gave her people to read. And also I mean, he even admitted this, that if she hadn't sent out his poems and sent out his manuscripts and kind of acted as his literary agent, you know, he may never have achieved any kind of poetic fame. He said in I think he said, if not for her, I'd be fishing off a rock in Western Australia. I mean, he was about to immigrate to Australia when he met Plath. Like, I've seen the visa documents. They're at the University of Huddersfield. So he was almost on his way out, and then he met her. And of course, I think later, and Connie, in your book, you make this point too, that when he comes to write birthday letters, right, he does have this more confessional voice, and so I think she even influenced him posthumously. So yeah, I mean, I think they had a huge impact on each other. These were people, they were artists who lived very intense, dramatic lives. They did not live lives like you and I. They sacrificed everything for their art, and they lived, the messy lives as well.
Connie, I want to take you to Yorkshire, West Yorkshire, because
I've never been there, so it's great.
Have you? Good. We were wondering beforehand whether both you, well, Heather obviously teaches there, but I thought you probably had been there for inspiration too. So, for obvious reasons, since the festival's set there, but Yorkshire played a huge part of the myths and the inherited stories that Ted and Sylvia told each other, didn't they?
Mm-hmm. Yes, they did. But I really had to find out that how English it is to be so influenced by those folk tales, by those songs, by those. So I started reading a lot about the folk tales, and to try to understand Ted Hughes better and to understand the English better, because I don't think we Dutch have such an influence. We don't have such a great culture in myth and saga and fairy tales or songs that are so of a huge influence. So that was very interesting, and of course I haven't been there. I never go to places to be inspired or to look how it really is. I need I need all the imagination I have to try to understand the life. So I don't have to watch and to see the house or the hills. Or I've watching Last Tango in Halifax. That's as far as I went to come.
I just finished watching that. Yeah, great show.
Great, isn't it?
Great one. Yeah.
But I was thinking about the sort of, the story, like not only just the folk tales and stuff, but also the Bronte myths, the Heathcliff and the Cathy, it feels, as well as the D.H. Lawrence myths and things like that. It feels like, they understood, picking up what you said, Heather, about Anglo-American, they kind of understood their place somehow, it seemed to me. Do you think that's true? I'm going to stay with Connie for a second. Do you think that's true, Connie?
Well, yes, I think it's part of their how they looked at themselves. Of course, the story of Lawrence with his Frida, the marriage of two special people, was kind of romantic idea. We are a little bit like Frida and D.H. Lawrence, and this is a way of looking at yourself, and reading. Reading the. I mean, I wrote a part in my book about how Sylvia Plath feels so very near to the Bronte, the Wuthering Heights, and I mean it's this mixture for literature. It's very important to open up this mixture of real lives and the influence of literature. That when a lot of women or people or even friends named Ted Hughes, Heathcliff. So this is literature is always, there's so much fiction in reality.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Yeah, it fits your novel, doesn't it?
That's my novel. That's what
it does fit your novel. That they had a fictionalized idea of themselves, even I thought.
I think so. Yes,
that's great. And Connie,
Plath at one point calls them a happy Cathy and Heathcliff in one of her letters.
Yes,
he really makes it explicit,
That's right.
Yeah.
But also that idea of the tapping on the window later and all that sort of stuff. It's always been a haunting story, isn't it? But Heather, just to go back to your point about the two, we have this Yorkshire earthy man, and a slightly preppy, I was going to say Canadian, preppy American with her ponytail. And it was always a very strange combination. And I feel, as you say, that the American and the English aspect to them was important to them, to the attraction, I would say.
Yeah. I mean, in one of the birthday letters poems, Hughes writes, "Your long American legs went up and up."
Yeah. Even her mother's too.
Yeah. and that idea, well, I mean, I think there was this idea that American women were kind of more sexually open, right? A lot of people I interviewed mentioned that, but yeah, that she was just sort of this breath of fresh air. And other people I interviewed who had been at Cambridge at the time, they all remembered her clothes, and they said that she just cut such an incredible figure at Cambridge because she wore these bright colors and wonderful matching outfits, and at a time when the fashion in Britain was still, things were gray and drab, and these particular styles and cuts hadn't quite reached across the Atlantic yet. So she really cut this outsized figure, and one of Ted Hughes' best friends, Daniel Hughes, said, she really made her impact. You noticed her. She did a fashion spread in Varsity, and she modeled bathing suits and dresses, and she kind of made fun of herself. She said, "Oh, it shows how hard up they are, right? That they had to use me as a fashion model." But she did enjoy it. So yeah, and I think that that was kind of magnetic in a sense. And of course, she was so brilliant, and she was also an aspiring poet, and they had that in common. And they both were raised in traditional households, but they were iconoclasts at heart as well. And I think that brought them together too.
Yeah.
So, and on the one hand, they're very different, and on the other, kind of wanted similar things out of their own lives, and they both gave everything to art. I mean, that was.
I want to ask you both about your titles. Connie, tell us where your title comes from.
Oh, well, the book is translated now in about 15 countries. And the original title, the Dutch title, is, when I translated, maybe ugly, "You Said It."
Oh.
That's the original title, which comes from the Bible, when Jesus is having his last meal with his pupils, and Judas is asking, and that Jesus is telling them, "One of you will betray me within 24 hours." And then they all say, "I'm not me, Rabbi, not me." And then Judas also says to Jesus, "It's not me, Rabbi." And then Jesus says, "You said it," which is a very mysterious remark in every language. But the most countries, I think the French started with the ton histoire, mon histoire, by translating it as your story, my story. Some countries did "You Said It" or "Du sagst es," "Dat was auch nicht selber," which is Swedish. So I was inspired by this Judas theme, that biography, which is what Oscar Wilde said: every famous man gets his biographer, and it's the Judas who will of his friends, Judas will help the biographer. So there's an element of Judas, of betrayal, in reading about yourself in a biography when you're still alive. When you find out that friends have been talking about you. I mean, I have a lot of experience about this myself. So it's very strange of having seen documentaries about yourself, and friends are popping up from your past and are explaining you and are trying to figure you out on national television.
That helps me, because I was wondering, I saw in an ad or in an article that you had named it your Judas novel.
Yes.
So that helps me.
Oh, good.
Yeah, no, that clarifies that. And Heather, why did you call yours Red Comet?
So for about 7 years, the title of this book was The Light of the Mind. um,
I think you got a better title.
and that was one of the, it's from The Moon and the Yew Tree. It's from the first line of that
I'm going to hear about,
yeah, which is one of my favorite Plath poems. And I liked that former title because it had the words light and mind in it. And those were kind of two symbolic things that I was trying to bring out in the book, get her out of that darkness and get her, and also try to get my readers to recognize how cerebral she was and, how brilliant. This was one of the finest minds of her generation. And she shouldn't be, remembered for this just this one act. She's just a brilliant literary critic as well as a poet. So, but my editor wanted, just thought that's not going to work. It's too subtle. It's not bold enough. So over a few weeks, we came up with a bunch of different titles, and I have to give credit to my editor. She came up with the title, and so. The title is from Stings, and I was so kind of wedded to my old title. It took me a while to get used to it, but now I really like it because it is short, and I think it does get the point across. Because in Stings, the speaker writes about I have a self to recover, a queen, and so that idea of recovery was always important to my book. But I'm really fascinated by these questions that Connie brings up about biography and this idea of betrayal. And, I'm someone who's always, I think any of us who write biography are always thinking about these issues and writing ethical biography. And well, is the reader better off if she or he just reads Plath's letters and diaries? I mean, why does the reader need a biography? She left a really detailed paper trail.
She sure
and
did.
most of it is published. Not most of it, but a lot of it is published. And so, what's the point, right? And so I'm always just trying to justify that to myself and trying to give an interpretive sense of her life that justifies the whole writing. Yeah,
that's what a good biographer does, an ethical biographer does. But you also have something like the Judas biography.
Mm-hmm.
You have a biographer who's mean and who's trying to ruin his own subject. So it's always it's on the verge of a dangerous genre. But every writer is a kind of Judas, so I shouldn't be.
I think that's true. Speaking as publisher, I think you've got that lovely line, Connie. Biographical storytelling is a legalized form of gossip. That's why we love it so much. I thought that was really good. So before we stop, because can you believe we're going to end soon? I'm sure we could do it. We could talk a lot longer. Maybe we'll have to come back for Vol 2. I want to just turn to the poetry of Hughes and of Plath, because, as you said, both of you, the reason we know them through their acts, we know them through their myths, but, otherwise they would be soap opera stories, wouldn't they? I mean, they're bigger than that. They're better than that. And they represent a lot more than that. So I would like to go to you first, Connie, to talk about the poem you want to tell us about of Hughes that you like so much. And then I'm going to come to Heather for her poem.
Well, I make it global because I love this quote. I love Crow very much. So the having the crow as a figure who speaks to you, who's so destructive and at the same time so touching. It's such a genius to have a crow speak to you. And then Max Porter did this special thing in Grief is the Thing with Feathers. I loved it, and so Crow, but you can't take a little bit. So I will have a little bit of Crow. It's like he tells the biography of a bird, but it's in fact it's a biography of grief and of longing and of anger and of kindness. It's a whole book of feelings. I find I find it one of the most beautiful poem books ever. And I also love very much birthday letters because I use
Mm,
all those 88 poems from birthday letters are at the basis of my novel. I
mm,
use them all to give a structure to my novel.
mm.
Crow is so special, and of course I love the poems of Plath too. But Heather will talk about Plath. So you want me to read that little bit of
Yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry. We're going to give the longer poem to Plath, but we'll have a short
Well, give me
piece.
the short one. I
You'll
don't
get.
mind. Fine.
It's not about you.
This is from Examination at the Womb Door, and it ends with is a crow asking, "Who owns the holy? No, who owns the whole rainy, stony earth? That who owns all of space? That who is stronger than hope? That who is stronger than the will? That stronger than love? That stronger than life? That but who is stronger than death? Me, evidently. Fast growth."
Good.
I love
I think
that.
I like it even more with your accent. It's really good. It's
Yeah.
really good.
Yeah.
It's nice.
Yeah.
So Heather, we'll finish with the poem you chose, but just before you do that, could you also just help us out a bit? Because one of the things you're saying in your book is that you want us to read Plath as a surreal rather than confessional poet. And can you just help us out with the word surreal and then read us the poem you've chosen?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I do see the ways in which she is a confessional poet. But I feel like that word has been bandied about for so many years and has kind of lost its original context, you know. And I think it can be a reductive term to use with Plath because it implies that she's just writing these kind of impulsive cries from the heart that are inward facing, and the word narcissistic often goes along with confessional. And I don't think that's quite true. She is writing autobiographically often, but you know, Ted Hughes was someone who pointed this out, that she's, even as she's writing using details from her own life, she's always taking details from myth and surrealist art, and she disguises her speakers often. You know, a lot of her speakers are classical heroines. We don't necessarily get Sylvia Plath in these poems, so yeah, I just wanted us to broaden our contextual framework, right, when we're reading her poems. This poem, "The Moon and the Yew Tree," that I'm about to read was written in October of 1961. So shortly after Plath and Hughes moved to North Taunton in Devon. And Plath was having trouble sleeping during this time, and she was awake near dawn. And Hughes told her he sort of gave her this exercise, said, look out the window and write about what you see. So I thought it was a nice poem to read because of the Plath Hughes mutuality of it, in a sense. And I will go ahead and read it. "The Moon and the Yew Tree." This is the light of the mind, cold and planetary. The trees of the mind are black. The light is blue. The grasses unload their griefs on my feet as if I were God, prickling my ankles and murmuring of their humility. Fumy, spiritus mists inhabit this place. separated from my house by a row of headstones. I simply cannot see where there is to get to. The moon is no door. It is a face in its own right, white as a knuckle and terribly upset. It drags the sea after it like a dark crime. It is quiet with the agape of complete despair. I live here. Twice on Sunday, the bells startle the sky, 8 great tongues affirming the resurrection. At the end, they soberly bong out their names. The yew tree points up. It has a Gothic shape. The eyes lift after it and find the moon. The moon is my mother. She is not sweet like Mary. Her blue garments unloose small bats and owls. How I would like to believe in tenderness, the face of the effigy, gentled by candles, bending on me in particular its mild eyes. I have fallen a long way. Clouds are flowering, blue and mystical over the face of the stars. Inside the church, the saints will all be blue, floating on their delicate feet over the cold pews, their hands and faces stiff with holiness. The moon sees nothing of this. She is bald and wild, and the message of the yew tree is blackness, blackness and silence.
Thank you. Thank you both. I told you before we came online that because I've been reading so intensely, I've been waking up with Plath and Hughes in my mind every single morning. And it's, yeah, I feel very enriched by both of your books. And I really want to say thank you to Heather Clark. I'm sorry, you've got to get all my post-its to Heather Clark, author of Red Comet.
Thank you. You know, the American
Connie.
version is so much bigger.
Oh no!
I like the British version because they used smaller paper. It's easier to hold.
I have to say, when they both flipped through the letterbox, I was very happy. I was happier to see this one.
I bet.
But I love both of them. Thank you very much. Your Story, My Story by Connie Palmen.
Thank
you.
I
want to say thank you so much. You've been really fascinating, both of you.
Thank you, Lenny.
Thank you. Thank you for
You're very welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you to the Bradford Literature Festival and to the New Dutch Writing and the Dutch Foundation for Literature. It's a triumph, you two. Thank you.
Thank you. You were very good. Thank you. It was over in a sec.
I know.
I know.
Oh, yeah. It was really very good.